Hey folks, this is Best in Slot. Welcome back to our coverage of Prehistoric Planet, our episode by episode review and discussion and all that kind of jazz. As per usual, if you haven't seen it already, I really would recommend you go check it out for yourselves. It's definitely worth doing. It's there's a lot of little surprises in here that you won't get just watching it from my video. It needs to be experienced properly, so go check it out on Apple TV. Just to emphasize, because I've had about 500 comments about this, you do not need an Apple device to watch Apple TV. It's basically Netflix kind of thing. It's not great on a Windows browser, it must be said, but it does work. Anyways, let's dig into the desert. We're opening up here in the western portion of South America with our, you can just see them there in the distance, our Dreadnoughtus, our Titanosaur. And it's really, really well done, this whole sort of sequence, because it frames them. I'm going to jump forward a shot. Between the music and the framing, it kind of frames them almost like a war movie or kind of like a war epic, and they're like massive soldiers wandering into battle, and that's kind of what they are, as we'll see in just a moment. But there's a bunch of absolutely staggering shots in this section. There really is. It's some of the best, if not the best shot section in both episodes so far, this entire Dreadnoughtus bit. You can see them here just moving forward with the sun catching them from behind, silhouetting them against the backdrop, the sort of the low dust rolling through, and between that and the music and their rumbles and growls, and you see them sort of snapping at each other and growling, and it builds them up as these ferocious, aggressive feeling herbivores, which is, as I said in the last video, like quite a unique thing for these shows to do, and really interesting as well. And it just, I don't know, it's very epic, to say the least. I love how this show and all this has been framed. And they also show little babies. I can't remember what he's called. It is mentioned in the episode, but I forgot to write it down. But they flit around a little bit and they land on top of the Dreadnoughtus. And obviously they're very, very small, but they're there kind of, I'd suggest, more than anything, to kind of emphasize just how huge this Dreadnoughtus is, because you can see them in comparison to a sliver of the neck of the Dreadnoughtus. They're absolutely dwarfed by it, so they really emphasize just how huge these creatures are and how epic their upcoming confrontation is going to be. Anyways, basically, all these males, these are all males here, and they're gathering together to fight for a mate. So they've decided, for whatever reason, that the place to fight is these giant deserts, almost salt flat looking sort of areas, and they decided, you know what, yeah, let's go kill each other in the middle of the desert. Why not? And as you see here, these are the females basically waiting for the males to approach, and again you can kind of see how it's framed like a war. You know, they're here to battle for mating, and they're here to battle each other essentially, but even the males against the females here is framed like a bit of a war film. That's the enemy, inverted commas, sort of laid out in front of them, ready to be battled, and the males are approaching. You could see this in, you know, if this was a group of like the soldiers, the protagonist soldiers in any film, and then they come over a ridge and there's a bunch of enemy units or monsters or whatever beyond the ridge, and it's absolutely been framed like that on purpose, I'm pretty sure. And they're strutting by each other, the air sacs, obviously, you know, that bloop, 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 bloop. This is all speculative, sure, but it's cool speculation. It's speculation that I enjoy. And they are as bizarre now as they were in the previews, but, you know, the males are strutting by, going bloop, 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 and the females are all going, wow, and kind of looking up and kind of like in almost wonderment, and they're obviously trying to judge the males. The males are trying to show off by having the biggest sack, essentially, and the strongest muscles and stuff like that. But of course, such mating displays must lead to conflict. And lead to conflict it does. There's like a resident bull, basically this gigantic male who's been here for 2 weeks, taking center stage, just banging everyone basically. And there's a young buck, the one on the left, this red one over here, sort of redder colour one, has decided to try to take over the area. And again, this feels like an epic clash between two titans, and I mean it is essentially, but it really is made to feel like that. And the females in the area, you see them all lying down here, they all kind of turn to look and almost gasp in wonderment as they watch these two square up to each other. And the fight itself is absolutely brutal. They're whomping each other with their necks, there's bites going on, they've got, you know, spikes on their thumbs, and they're digging into each other, and they're just, you really feel this sort of weight and intensity to every movement. You feel like these are gigantic. Every movement is kind of laboured and slow, but then when it hits really, really hard. It's like a big Dark Souls boss, right? Where, well, not these days actually, but it used to be, if it was big and hit really hard, it would have a really long wind up, but it would hit like a truck. It's kind of the same thing for the Dreadnoughtus. The necks will come in and it feels quite slow, but then they hit, and you hear this ripple of muscle and the bone cracking and everything, and you really do get the sense that they're dealing immense amounts of damage, and obviously the music is building it up as this epic confrontation. It kind of goes from, it's been the war film and now it's the rivals battling out at the end. And unlike last time, this time the young buck, unlike with the Mosasaurus for example, does emerge victorious. I don't think the older male is meant to be dead. He kind of gets up a little bit, but then he falls back down again. It's kind of framed a little bit sad. You can see we're kind of obscuring the head here a little bit. It's meant to be that kind of dramatic kind of moment. And the young male is triumphant and extremely pleased with himself. He raises his head up, bloop, 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 and you can see it here. You can literally see it happening here. Here, 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 here. All the females begin to like turn in his direction because he is now the dominant male of the area. He has achieved dominance, I guess. And when, oh, I was meant to mention this. I do have to reference my notes. When the bull goes down, the music shifts. It's been this epic confrontation, this dum dum da dum, or whatever. But it becomes this kind of melancholy choral kind of music as it falls down. It's kind of like, again, like when a soldier drops in a war movie. It's actually a really kind of beautiful moment in a sort of somber sort of way, and that gets emphasized in a moment because they say that, you know, these battles can turn fatal. I've just remembered what happens. They say these battles can turn fatal. Attenborough mentions it, and there's this phenomenal shot, this kind of time-lapse shot where it's zooming out from the battlefield essentially. The mating season's over, the Dreadnoughtus have begun to disperse, and all that's left behind are the bodies of those who died in the process. I believe this is our resident buck, or resident bull, I should say, and he's the one who, and these other ones disappear as well, and he's the only one left, and it's kind of like the time of day drops and drops and gets darker and darker, and eventually his body's the only one left. It's very dramatic, really, really beautiful, and again, framed like a war film. You could see, like, if the hero died or their companion died or something in the midst of the battle, you could see the camera zooming out and just showing their body sort of lying there. It's beautiful stuff. Bit sad, but beautiful. Anyways, now we move to Asia. There's a big old sauropod carcass, lovely stuff. And this entire Asian section we're about to see is, I believe we're in Mongolia. There's a lot of like little lizards hopping around, basically. You'll see them in a moment. But the whole thing's kind of framed through their eyes, which is good because you kind of see this in, like, say, Jurassic Park, for example. Framing the dinosaurs through the eyes of the humans makes the dinosaurs seem a lot larger and a lot more impressive, a lot more majestic, and a lot more intimidating. You kind of get the same thing here when we're framing it through the eyes of this little hoppy around lizard, because the lizard's teeny tiny, just trying to get what food it can. And there's these gigantic dinosaurs 50 billion times its size, you know, wandering around. So it's a really nice way to showcase what's going on here. Anyways, we have our carcass, then we have our first introduction to the Tarbosaurus. Now, I believe we may have seen this in the later trailers or the teasers, but it's nice to confirm at the very least that the Tarbosaurus here does not roar, you know, like a T-Rex roar in Jurassic Park, for example. There were some comments about that, people saying, well, I'm pretty sure it didn't sound like that. I think that was just there for the trailer. That was just there to make a trailer more trailery, more appealing to the general public, basically. The noises here are really interesting, though. They're more like it's a low, growly, guttural kind of, it's kind of crocodilian in a way, but kind of guttural and kind of thing. It's what I would imagine Tarbosaurus sounds like. You know, it's all speculation to an extent. It kind of has to be. And I would say this episode, I think, has more speculative behavior than the last episode, generally speaking. Anyways, the narration says that, I just want to show the sleeping Tarbosaurus because I think it's adorable. It's really, really cute. And again, it's kind of we're going to see it a lot throughout this episode to an extent, but kind of what I was saying last episode with the T-Rex, whereas we've got this gigantic dinosaur, this apex theropod predator, and it's not hunting, it's not murdering things. It's going to get a little snappy in a minute, but it's not hunting things down. It's not bloodthirsty. It's not a monster. It's a real creature, and that means it plays, and that means it does silly things, and that means it looks like this every now and again when it's sleeping on its side, his little arms all curled up, and it's just really nice again to see these dinosaurs like this. But anyways, Tarbosaurus has been feasting on a corpse. There's flies everywhere, and the little lizard is excited about the possibility of feasting upon some little carcass flies. And there's a fantastic shot here, which is the one I'm trying to show you. This is, you've seen in the trailer where the eye suddenly opens. Basically, there's our little lizard. I don't know if you can see him. I can't really get out of the way. That's not really how it works. But you should be able to see part of him at least. And I just love how this shot is framed. So we've got the Tarbosaurus sleeping in the background. You can see the flies on the Tarbosaurus's eye. They're sort of flitting around the whole area. And the lizard is in the foreground. And obviously it's got a really shallow depth of field here. So even though these are quite close to each other, we can only really see the lizard in focus. And again, it's this really nice dramatic little moment. First, the shot is framed perfectly. So this little lizard's bouncing around trying to get all these flies. And the eye is obviously just sitting here in the distance, and you're just waiting for it to open and spot the lizard. It's like a little horror film, or like a scene from Godzilla or something like that. Anyways, then our Velociraptor makes its very first appearance, very quickly snatches up the lizard. As you can see, it's clambered there within its jaws. But the Velociraptor really does look incredible. It looked incredible in the teasers, and it looks incredible now. Easily the best Velociraptor ever put to film, or one of the best put to media in general. I love these. I love the grey coloration with these kind of like slashes of sort of tealy, steely sort of blue sort of colours in there. The feathering is obviously phenomenal. The small feathered dinosaurs in this show really are elevated above everything else, in my opinion. They just look... There's just something about the feathering that makes them look really good. And because they're smaller, the texture work and everything can be just a little bit higher quality naturally. But the raptor comes in, looks... I don't know what else to say about it. It just looks really good. It looks phenomenal. And then we get this really good scene wherein the raptor and the little lizard... The raptor's obviously hunting for the little lizard, but the Tarbosaurus is sleeping in the area, right? So it has to be a little bit cautious about the whole thing. You can see, again, just look at the plumage. You can just see the incredible differentiation on the wing feathers there, and even the plumage on the head and how it changes. It drops down the body, gets a little bit thicker there. It reminds me of like a harpy eagle a little bit, not so much around the head, but kind of there around the body. And this bit here that kind of feels like a neck fluff, I guess. It's a very Shakespearean in a way. But the raptor and the lizard are sort of squaring up to each other, and it's a bit like a I guess you call it a Mexican standoff. I don't really know why it's called a Mexican standoff. But you know, like in a cowboy film where they're doing a standoff in the middle of the town or whatever. It kind of feels a little bit like that because the lizard and the raptor are eyeing each other up. But of course, there's these sleeping Tarbosaurus nearby. And the raptor may dominate the lizard, but the Tarbosaurus is going to dominate the raptor. So the raptor's being very, very sneaky. Unfortunately for the raptor, the lizard's super sneaky, runs under the Tarbosaurus. Raptor goes to make the move to get it, and yeah, I just like that. Rather predictably, that doesn't go well. And the raptor's insistent little hopping around and sneaking around kind of ends up waking up the Tarbosaurus as they all start to pop up. And we get this fantastic shot of them lying here. They've been referred to as potatoes fairly often in the paleo Twitter community, and they just sort of wake up and they're watching what's going on. Just kind of this slightly bored curiosity, I suppose, is how they feel. They're not worried about the raptor, not scared about the raptor. It's just like an annoying little thing in the area. And you get the feeling when the first Tarbosaurus snaps at the raptor, it's one down here somewhere, snaps at it, but it's more like a just go away. It's not trying to kill it particularly. It's not interested in hunting it. It's just like, get out, I'm just trying to sleep, buddy. Leave me alone. Again, it's just really cool to see the Tarbosaurus like this, though. To see these apex predators in such a relaxed, chill, they're sunbathing. Essentially, they're just warming themselves up. They're just having a nice time relaxing in the sun on these rocks. And it's really nice behavior to see done. I love this. I don't know why, but I love that the tail is just kind of hanging off there because there's not too bad. He's just having a little nap. Obviously, they're not like super feathered or anything. I believe they've got less coverage than Hank does, but you can see along the back of the Tarbo. Where is my mouse gone? You can see along the back of the Tarbo here in particular and up there. They've got like when people nearly lose all their hair, but they've got a little bit of hair left. Just like a little spattering, a little smattering, a little slattering, a little mattering of furry looking featherage over the top of their skull and sort of down towards their back a little bit. You can see it goes down fairly... I keep losing my mouse. It goes down fairly far. You can see it there just a little bit. Just a slight fluffy coating sort of thing. It makes them look slightly like old men, but this in particular is just beautiful, isn't it? Just... Anyways, the Tarbosaurus get annoyed with the whole situation. They decide to move on from their carcass, which frees up the carcass for other things to move in. Unfortunately, it kind of gets rid of it for the lizard. The Tarbosaurus was kind of acting as this sort of protective barrier for the lizard, and that's bigger things that would eat the lizard, like the Velociraptor, like these pterosaurs, kind of got spooked away by the simple presence of the Tarbosaurus. But now that the Tarbosaurus has moved on, the lizard probably has to move on as well. Now, in the show, this at Starkid here isn't mentioned by name. It's just called a pterosaur. I did look into it. There is a unnamed Atstarkid from Mongolia that I think was discovered back in sort of 2017, something like that, quite a large one. That could well be what this is, but it isn't specified at all, you know, so I don't really know for sure. But that was a late Cretaceous Maastrichtian Atstarkid, so it could be that, but either way it's not named. I think it's meant to be indeterminate at this point in time. But that's where we get that fantastic shot from the trailers and stuff, where we're sort of inside the carcass and the Atstarkid's kind of snapping towards us as the camera. And you're going to see a few more camera tricks in this video. There's more of them compared to the last video, I'd say. And again, it's kind of what elevates this episode a little bit higher. It just feels like the camera's more part of the show in a way. And I feel like the shots are a little bit more experimental at times, a little bit more interesting. Anyways, next we move on to our Mononykus, and of course we've seen her a couple times now, but she looks absolutely phenomenal. She's very barn owl, maybe a little bit too barn owl for my taste, I don't know. But she's very, very barn owl, and she does look fantastic. They've speculated that she's got these, I don't know how much of it is speculation, how much is based on maybe achievements or whatever. But these facial discs made out of feathers, what they basically do is let her... It kind of amplifies sound a little bit. It lets her detect very small sounds a little bit easier, so it means she can hunt, she can track things down from further away. And again, as a small feathered dinosaur, she inevitably looks phenomenal. She's beautifully well animated. Whoever did the animation for the Mononykus, big shout out to them, because the way that she sort of hops and skitters about, and she's very, very quick in her movements like a modern bird. She feels nervous and twitchy, and also a little bit uncoordinated as she sort of darts around, but also very, very agile, very, very nimble. She is beautifully well animated, and it's important because we don't spend too long with these dinosaurs. I think it's like 4 minutes for the Mononykus, so you have to infuse them with so much personality so quick for us to kind of be, you know, it's all well and good, this is educational and entertaining, seeing dinosaurs come to life, but it has to be entertainment as well. You have to be, to an extent, you have to be invested into the lives of these creatures. You want to see the Mononykus complete her hunt. She goes and she finds herself a delicious log, and she's termite hunting, and so the facial disc is helping her hear the little chitter of the termites. And she, you know, digs in with her claw, the Mononykus claw, where she got her name from, and she uses a long, sort of almost prehensile tongue to kind of like scoop up the termites. I'm trying not to show you absolutely everything. I really want people to go watch the show. But she digs into this log. But this is kind of what I meant by the camera work here as well. The camera sits here at the... It looks like it's attached to the log. It looks like a trap camera almost. It's got that distorted, slight fisheye kind of effect. And she hops up onto the log and she crawls up and she kind of almost seems to glance at the camera slightly before she goes in and digs herself in to hunt for those termites. But playing with the camera in that way, by kind of having it attached to the log, by having it feel like this trap camera, makes the camera feel more solidified and as part of the actual world, and therefore makes it feel more like an actual nature documentary, which therefore kind of makes the animals feel a little bit more real. I think this is very... The Mononykus, again, in this situation, she looks fantastic. She could be real. This could verge on how it actually looked. It really could. And again, just to try to infuse her with this personality, she comes out, but she's got little termites kind of crawling around her a little bit. She didn't quite manage to wrangle them all up, and she kind of gets like frustrated. She's kind of like shaking them off and bashes her head against the log a little bit and kind of kicks them off with her claws. And she looks visibly irritated, basically. And the fact that, you know, dinosaurs, they can't emote in the way that we can. So it's their actions and movements, it's their animation that has to bring them to life in terms of their personality. And the Mononykus really... Look at that feathering as well, it's gorgeous. Anyways, the Mononykus really sells that. Anyways, we're in the desert, but that doesn't mean there's no rain, there's no storms. Desert storm rolls in. We get this beautiful sort of paleo art-esque shot. I just love the coloration here and the way it's playing with the landscape. You can see the Mononykus there in the backdrop. She's well, she's in the foreground actually, but she's in the back bit, in the low bit, the bottom, you might call it. And she goes and hides for a second and observes this storm rolling in. And then this new lease of life, you know, all this plant life pops up, if only temporary, if only for a little bit while the rains still last. But there's a whole new feeding ground, there's scorpions to hunt, and there's little birds to hunt, and all this kind of stuff. And again, the Mononykus, and we spent quite a long time with her now, which is actually, I think, one of the things this episode does better. I feel like I would have to time it and count properly, but I feel like we spent more time with each animal rather than hopping around quite as much, and it let you get a little bit more attached to each of the dinosaurs or creatures. And Yeah, and that again kind of emphasizes their personality. But she's kind of, this is where those animations really came into play, where she's darting around, she's kind of looking up between things and hunting and failing to hunt and all this kind of jazz. And yeah, it was just, it's a beautiful little sequence. So moving on, now we're into Central Asia, where these deserts have been ripped apart by the winds, and this here is Barbaridactylus. So that means we're in the, we're in the Nemet formation. And it's a lovely herd of these Barbaridactylus, and they're kind of just moving through this desert. They're sort of dominated by the vastness of the desert. Anyways, basically the water has sort of seeped underground from various different locations and then popped up here to form a sort of oasis. And there's tons of different dinosaurs here. We've got Barbaridactylus, we've got an approaching Titanosaur, which we'll see in a second. We've got upper sauropods in the area, could be Nemetosaurus, for example. We've got a little ankylosaur, which you might be able to just about... Little ankylosaur you might be able to see just about there. And we've also got, the pterosaurs as well. And we've also got... Not actually on this shot, we'll see it in a second, but there is another very exciting dinosaur in the area as well. But our Titanosaur approaches. This is the Mongolian Titanosaur. I don't believe this has been named at this point in time. And again, it's just called... I think they just call it the Mongolian Titan in the episode, basically. And the Mononykus also makes an appearance, you can see it here. And the interesting thing is, I was kind of just talking about this differentiation in size. We just spent a lot of time with the Mononykus. We were really up close with the Mononykus as it hides in caves and darts around and eats. And it's clearly not a large dinosaur, it's hopping up at the logs and eating insects. But it never feels tiny because the camera's zoomed in, right? The camera's right there with the Mononykus, it never really zooms out. And that's really smart use of the camera, because we've done all that with the Mononykus really up close, got to know the Mononykus really well. And then in the next scene with this Titanosaur approaching, to emphasize the size of the Titanosaur, we can see that the Mononykus is barely taller than a nail, barely taller than the very bottom of the foot of this dinosaur. So it really instantly emphasizes the gigantic size of what's going on here. Anyways, they all gather down here at the watering hole. The Titanosaur reaches over to drink. It's got some lovely patterning as well. I love this kind of split between the orange upper body and the sort of slightly blue lower body, and then there's got that black streak down the middle. Just interesting, varied patterning. You know, it's nice to see them. None of the dinosaurs are like super vibrantly bright or anything like that. They all feel colourful and interesting without being over the top. You can see with the Barbaridactylus there, it's got this almost molten sort of patterning going on, this gradient from oranges to yellows, red to orange to yellow, and then this sort of black cracking effect going along it. And it's not screaming out with colour or anything, but it's varied and interesting and colourful. But more importantly, and given, by the way, no importance in the video, we have Therizinosaurus over here on the left hand side, looking absolutely phenomenal. Big danger floof there, gigantic claws. The red is really interesting as well. You can see there's a lot of these sort of browns and reds and oranges and stuff like that in a desert environment, which makes a lot of sense because a little bit of camouflage isn't necessarily a bad idea. But of course, so many herbivores, so many potential preys, yep, in one area will inevitably lead to predators. And I really enjoyed this shot. We see all the Barbaridactylus, particularly down here at the water's edge. And they do this a lot. Now that I look at it, now that I think about it, this kind of shot where the dinosaurs kind of dominate the bottom of the screen, I think if you went back through this video and the last video, you'd see a lot of shots very similar to this. But it's just kind of static, just left alone. And then you just see the Tarbosaurus poke its head over the top. And again, I think this is something this episode does better than the last episode, is that consistency of... We see a lot of new dinosaurs, tons of new species, but there's a slight increase in consistency in how often the same dinosaurs appear. And the Tarbosaurus, of course, is framed. It's a predator, it's framed in that kind of way. It's kind of sneaking up in the distance. It's kind of, you know, a bit like a horror film where there's a ghost standing in the doorway in the background and you got to kind of spot it out. It's very much how it's set up. But the Tarbosaurus just isn't interested. You know, this is very much like a behaviour that exists in the real world. You'll go to a watering hole in Africa, and not that rarely, you'll see predator and prey living together in relative harmony. The prey might be a little bit wary, but they'll all drink from the same watering hole without problem fairly often. But the way this is framed, it's almost like the Tarbosaurus is royalty or something. The Tarbosaurus comes down to drink, and all the Barbaridactylus kind of just sort of slide to the side. It's like he's Moses parting the sea of dinosaurs, and the Barbaridactylus sort of slide to the side and let the Tarbosaurus in to drink. Because whilst they're not running away, they're not massively panicking. they're going to drink from the same watering hole, they don't necessarily want to stand right next to it either. You know, there has to be a little bit of a balance there. And look at that shot. Isn't that beautiful? It's honestly like the king has returned. It's just nearly appropriate for Tarbosaurus. Anyways, we must journey on to North Africa and the return of Barbaridactylus. We can see some males here with their gigantic crests. This is one of my favourite sequences so far. Absolutely fantastic. Not only in the setup here, we're here in North Africa, and we can see this, again, the pterosaurs caught in the light, caught in the shadow, the silhouetting. It just looks fantastic. This whole environment is really dramatic. You can see them flitting around. It looks absolutely beautiful. It really does. Just the photography, never mind the addition of the CGI pterosaurs, is really, really good. Very dramatic, very epic kind of feeling to the whole thing, and then it's going to subvert those expectations pretty bloody well. Because we have, it's a mating display, right? So there's lots of little females, as you can see around here. The short crested ones are the females, and then the giant ones are about 4 or 5 times the size with these huge crests are the males, and they're going to battle each other for dominance, and they're going to, you know, try to claim the best mating spots and the best mates and stuff. And I don't have the shot of it in here, but it's actually a really good, these two end up fighting each other, and again, it's more Top Gun Maverick kind of style battling. Look at them, they're so tiny. Anyways, they're battling each other, swooping around, and eventually the pretender to the throne actually gets taken down, gets kind of whomped into the cliff face a little bit, slides down, and actually just full on dies. And it gets very understated, music just kind of stops, and the body stops, and it's kind of, again, kind of somber, but also not shying away from the brutality that would have occurred. It is worth mentioning that basically all of this is speculative and based on behaviors from just modern creatures, modern vertebrates, basically. You know, I don't believe we've got proper evidence for this kind of thing existing, but it would also be a very difficult thing for evidence of this existing. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with just speculating and drawing behaviors from modern animals. And anyways, the whole setup of this bit is actually really interesting, and again, infused with personality, because we've got these females here, but this lad over here is, as the word lad might suggest, a male. And it's just a male that hasn't grown like the others. It hasn't been explained as to why, and again, I believe this is a speculative thing based on modern vertebrate behaviors, but either way, it's an interesting idea. This male basically hasn't developed the crest and hasn't developed the size of the other males. And he is, as he's referred to several times by Attenborough, the sneak. And he's just sneaking into the group of females because all the other males are kind of huge and dominant, and kind of the females kind of flock around them and they're kind of showing off. And this guy just thinks, you know what, I'll just go in myself. I'll just sneak in. I'll resemble one of the females. And you can see some people saying that, I saw a mention of this on Twitter, people complaining about Prehistoric Planet going woke. This is like a, yeah, I don't want to get too much into it, but I can see people getting annoyed by this, which would also be the most ridiculous thing in the world. I thought it was an amazing scene. But the little guy, he's sort of sneaking through. And the big guy, again, this is beautifully framed and very, very funny. This episode, I would say, is not as funny as the last episode. I'm not saying that should be the main goal, but it's worth mentioning. But this scene was actually really, really good. This gigantic male, this humongous one with this massive crest, he's very, very impressive. He's flipping out his wings and he's bobbing his head all over the place. And it zooms in on the female. She kind of looks at him and then just walks off. It's just played up as in, yeah, I would like to believe this kind of thing happened. I don't see why it wouldn't. It exists in modern animals. It could exist in pterosaurs. I just want to show you up close with the male. Is this the male? I don't know anymore. This must be the male. I think this is the large male. But basically what happens is the male, I don't know why I have a screen cap of this, but the large male sees the little male, the sneak, as he's again constantly referred to, and decides, it kind of frames as though the large male is going to hunt down the smaller male, because at the end of the day, the smaller male is trying to steal his mates, right? Essentially trying to sneak his way in there. But the large male actually decides to do a dominance, a mating display for the small male. He doesn't realize that it's a male, not a female, and decides to try and impress it. And the small male, being the very sneaky small male that he is, instead of risking being mated with by the large male, just pretends to be a disinterested female, wanders off, and eventually does get to mate. So the sneak wins the day. And Attenborough says, what is it? Females mate with as many mates as possible, whether they're impressively adorned or just sneaky. So there's a top tip, dating tips from Attenborough, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to date someone, you need to be impressively adorned or sneaky. If not, you're out of luck. Don't know what to tell you. It's nature, science. Can't argue with it. And it was really interesting when they're mating as well. I don't have the image of this, but we do see a little bit of them. We saw this sort of courtship dance, and then a little bit of the actual mating. It doesn't go full on. It's not bow check. It doesn't go full on bow check or wow, but there's the start of it. So the little male pterosaur's behind the little female pterosaur, and kind of like he sort of reaches around and kind of bites onto her neck, sort of grips on, which again is something that a lot of modern animals do for grip, basically, and also partially probably to keep her in place. The natural world is a violent place, but isn't it a beauty? It looks so good. The feathering, the coloration, the texturing on the beak, and the way it sort of blends together this little bit here. Yeah, I love it. It's a really, really good scene. Definitely worth checking out. And all just shot beautifully. Fantastic looking pterosaurs. Again, it's nice to see the same pterosaurs coming back. I'm not crazy, right? We had Barbaridactylus last video as well, yeah? Yeah. Nearly at the end now. Anyway, we're off to South America to the Great Gypsum Dunes. You can kind of see it there, this sort of like pale white sand, but it's this mineral. So basically it has to be like the driest places on Earth. This kind of thing couldn't exist anywhere else because the water would just obliterate it, basically. And it introduces the first species, I believe, that I had never... Oh, I hadn't heard of Tyrannosaurus. That was new on me as well. And Kekefelu. But the first of this video that was new on me entirely is Sacernosaurus. It's a small hadrosaur, basically, that lived in these super arid environments. It is quite tiny. It's kind of adorably tiny, and basically there's a lack of food, and what they need to do is go and venture off into the desert in order to find water and to find food. And so they head off at nighttime, and we see the babies a little bit, and it's interesting because last video I mentioned that this video was very focused on the babies, the Alcyone babies, and the Tyrannosaurus baby, and the Tyrannosaurus Rex baby. Babies were quite a focus, whereas in this video, this is, I believe, the first hatchling, the first juvenile dinosaur in the entire video. Which I think is quite interesting. I think it's very easy to kind of default to the babies. I don't know, what's the theme of this episode then, more than anything? Just the harsh environment, I suppose, more than anything. It's more environmentally based than the coastal one was. It's all about how these different dinosaurs and different creatures adapt to that environment, basically. Anyways, venturing off at nighttime, they can hear the waves rumbling because they're hadrosaurs and they've got this ability to detect these really low rumbling sounds. And it also suggests, like other migratory modern animals, because modern animals are fantastic at migrating and at directions and at knowing where to go. Like, even if it would seem seemingly impossible, animals figure out where to go. And it suggests with our Sacernosaurus, it suggests with our hadrosaurs that they can actually read signs in the stars. They can read constellations, not necessarily, no, like that's Orion, let's go that way, but more like they can detect certain formations in the stars and think, or celestial events or whatever, and think that's the way we need to go to an extent. I mean, they're not thinking that, but you know what I mean. They would follow the stars, which is a really interesting idea, and it's something, again, that modern migratory animals do. So I don't see any reason why a prehistoric migratory animal wouldn't necessarily do the same thing. Anyways, the music is rising and rising. You can hear it's kind of going do, and it's building up in tempo, and it's building up in volume, and it's kind of selling this idea of this epic journey across the dunes. This herd of hadrosaurs is traveling across the sands, desperately searching for water. They may not all survive. They may not make it all to the end. And it has to try to sell this idea of an epic journey within a couple of minutes, and it does a pretty good job. Again, some beautiful shots like this one right here as they sort of climb up these massive coastal dunes, these gigantic ones. The babies are beginning to suffer a little bit. The hatchlings are beginning to cry out every now and again. They're all framed beautifully by the setting sun. And then eventually, again, closing off the episode with a happy moment, which I suspect is a purposeful choice they're going to keep on making, like they did in the last video. They make it, and there's all these sort of the mist rolling in where the sea and the dunes hit each other. There's all this fog, and it kind of coats their body in water, and they lick it off, and it's adorable, basically. And that's the end of the episode. A couple more things I want to very quickly mention. I went back, I actually forgot to watch the Uncovered episode, so I just quickly went and watched that. And it's basically talking about the Barbaridactylus. And the head crest, what the head crest was like used for, how they used wind tunnels to check out whether it would have been good for flight. Turns out probably not, so it was likely a display feature, which is very much what we saw in the episode. But then it went on to mention how in the animal kingdom, in kangaroos and in cuttlefish and in many birds, sneaky males, less impressive sneaky males, can indeed, make their move. Other males don't see them as a threat. They wait till their back is turned and they get in there and do their thing. So that's really interesting, and it is... like I said, we can't prove that behavior happened in Barbaridactylus. Of course we can't. That would be a nearly impossible thing to ever prove just via the fossil record, right? But it's fun to infer things from modern animals, you know, and animals, similar animals that have big display crests, and, you know, the males are very strong in their sexual dimorphism. This kind of thing happens quite a lot in many different species. So why not Barbaridactylus? You know what I mean? Why not? Anyways, and there's a little comment about how we can all take some inspiration from the pterosaurs. It's not just the one with the biggest crest who wins, you know? Maybe all the other females are going for the one with the big crest, and you, with your little crest, can make your move. Never know, folks. Right, okay. Oh yeah, there's one other thing I want to talk about. This is a slight against the show. I didn't watch the credits, because I don't usually watch the credits, if I'm totally honest. But it came out on Twitter sort of yesterday, last night, and today that the VFX artists for this show have not been credited in the credits, as in there's no mention of the VFX artists, the special effects artists for Prehistoric Planet in the credits at all. Now, given it's a show 100% reliant on special effects, you know, it would not exist otherwise, and the special effects are remarkable and hopefully award-worthy and all this kind of jazz. That seems incredibly ridiculous to me, and it kind of reminds me of how people are battling for better deals for animation and more credit for animators and stuff like that. Kind of feels like the same sort of deal. The VFX artists are wonderful on this show, all of them. I know I couldn't possibly, if we ever get a list of all of them, I will do a list, but I don't want to start mentioning people and leaving people out and stuff like that. But I'll do some credits at some point if possible, but that's a little ridiculous, and I hope it's something Apple TV is listening to, because I know there's been a bit of an outcry, and hopefully, because at the end of the day, it's an online show, right? It's something that can be changed. Hopefully they decide to go and change that credit sequence and add all the people who deserve it, you know? Yeah. Anyways, right, we'll end it there. Thank you very much for joining me. Let me know what you thought about the episode down below. For me, I'd say it's the best of the two so far. Anyways, we'll end it there. Thank you so much for joining me. Let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. We'll be back tomorrow for this swampy episode. I can't remember what it's called, but it's swampy. Thanks for joining me. Cheers, much as always. Bye-bye.